I'm going to actually give the stage to film historian, enthusiast, writer Bobbie Osteen and Kevin Tent.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Love you, Kevin.
Is that Kelly? I thought so. I recognized your voice.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Kevin. I'm honored to have you here.
Thanks for having me
tonight. Your trajectory is really interesting, and there's sort of a lesson here too that I think will come out of it. So let's start from the beginning, rewind all the way to Buffalo. You grew up
in Buffalo, New York. Yep, just up the road.
And you did experiment with little Super 8 filmmaking.
Yes, I did.
And you did a film called I Was a Teenage Rodent.
Yes, I did. It's a very good film. It stars my sisters and my sisters and myself, and it's pretty fun.
And so it's interesting how you ended up in California. You were at SUNY College majoring in broadcasting.
Right.
And you hitchhiked across the country to the promised land.
Yes.
You just wanted to be in film, but you weren't really...
Never planned on being an editor. Really didn't even know that the job existed. I just had this vague notion that I wanted to do something in movies, and I figured they make movies out there, so I'll just go out there and check it out. And I just traveled out there, and it took a while, but I found myself editing at one point, and then found it just all kind of happened.
But you started out in educational films,
I did,
right?
yeah.
You did some really stellar films.
Yes, I did.
There are going to be some great titles we're going to bring up
today.
today.
A lot of clips from them. No.
I love some of these titles. VD, More Bugs, More Problems.
That's a good one.
Salt, The Hidden Threat.
Very good one.
Cholesterol, What Can You Do?
Yeah.
So you said that was interesting because you really learned about everything except cutting negative, virtually everything.
We did. It was like this little company the guy had made. He was a cameraman in World War II and then started making those really static, boring educational films that everyone sort of associates with the 50s. He was still making them in the 80s. And I got hired to be his editor, and it was fine. It was a job, but I had to do pretty much everything: sound effects, mixing, syncing the dailies. I did everything except for cutting the negative. That's pretty much the only thing I didn't do. But I took everything to the labs. I just had to do it all. I was editing and getting things done, and which was a good opportunity for me. I learned a lot.
And this was, but you also ended up at LA City College.
Yeah.
Before that,
yeah, I went.
And that was interesting because it was very small, and they just kind of said, take 2 weeks and make a film. And
Yep. We had very little theory classes because Proposition 13, which was a big deal in California and still is, went through. So they had financed this building with all this brand new equipment and everything like that. But once Proposition 13 went through, they had no money for instructors or any kind of, there were a couple of instructors. It was bare bones. So we had basically an editing teacher and a cinematography teacher and one teacher that taught screenwriting and history. But there wasn't a lot of theory class, so I never had any of that, which was unfortunate because that's kind of fun to have. But it was good for me because they basically said, go, take the camera, come back. It was unsupervised because there was no one to supervise you, so it was an okay thing.
So now comes the really interesting
Yeah.
part. So I don't know how many of you know who Roger Corman is. How many of you know? Okay. So not many, because that was a whole other era. This was when sort of home video was exploding, and he actually made films and distributed them, and they were really cheesy. And he was like a B-movie king, and it was like sometimes 15 movies a year. And you got hired because of a guy was Was this the guy in your apartment?
No.
Oh, no, that
That's
was,
right.
how
Yeah.
did you get hired for that?
That was because I made a couple short films at LACC, and that's actually how I got my first job editing educational films. And then they needed somebody at Roger Corman's to take over a movie that was in really bad shape. That was something Roger bought from France or something.
Emmanuel 5.
Yeah, Emmanuel 5 was not nearly as good as Emmanuel 4, right? But they tried. They tried. Yeah, so I got hired, and that was what's kind of interesting is that it was such a mess that no one really wanted to deal with it at all, that they just hired me, and I was actually the perfect person because they wanted someone to take it to the lab, they wanted someone to mix it and just take it all, and I was like, I can do that. I've been doing it at these. I did Salt the Hidden Threat. Haven't you seen that? You know, so it was a perfect job, and I got hired to do that job.
And so, this is sort of classic, too, that it was softcore, and they just put all the sexy stuff in this movie, and there were all these, there was no story, it didn't make sense, and you found boxes of film that nobody had looked at.
Absolutely true. I opened up it was all on film, so everything was rolled up in the rolls, for those of you who remember that. And they had not been touched. I could tell they had never been through the moviola. And so they were all the plot points to the movie. So everyone thought I was a genius, but really all I did was put the scenes in that were scripted and supposed to be in there, but somehow didn't wind up in there. And and then because of that, I got my first feature film, official feature film.
Which was, there is a porn sort of scenario
There is,
here.
yeah.
This was Tracy Lord's first legit film. She was a porn star.
Yes.
But just as a side note, so Roger Corman was this crazy factory where people would work long hours for little pay, and he was a very demanding guy who, you had to keep it moving, and you felt the pressure, and it was sort of. But the other thing is, you can't believe the people that got their start at Roger Corman. It's people like Jack Nicholson, James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola. So this was like a really seminal kind of thing that was happening, despite the fact that these movies were really cheesy.
Yeah.
And for you, what an incredible! It's like you. Well, we're going to talk about this shortly, but. It's almost as if Kevin became a script doctor before he became an editor. And a script doctor is sort of something you evolve to when you're an in-demand editor and you're fixing problems. But you became a problem-solving right out of the gate.
No, it evolved, apparently.
But anyway, so actually there was another movie that you edited that I have to mention because maybe in honor of your son who's here, Frank and Hooker. Just because we had to mention it.
We had to mention it.
And this plot is pretty obvious. It's
Yeah.
a monster made out of...
As I used to say when working on it, there's something to offend everyone in it. But it's still pretty hilarious. That wasn't a Roger movie, actually. That was an independent.
Well, we still had to mention
Yeah, yes. Still good.
But so you did this for a while.
I did a lot of Roger Corman movies. It was a great place for editors. It was actually a great place for anyone who really wanted to, try out the film business. It was, and the people that really stuck to it and tried and made the best out of it were successful. And there was a high turnover rate. People would get better jobs really quickly as soon as they had a little experience. But it was a very good place to be an editor and to learn editing because we were talking earlier, Roger was ruthless. He had no qualms about cutting a whole scene out if it was slow and he didn't like it. He just cut the scene out, and you'd be like, "What? But that makes sense, But he had no problems with that. So, at least me, and I think a lot of the editors there, you were always trying to be preemptive to that because you knew he was going to try to cut stuff out. So you had to try to make it exciting and make it interesting and keep it moving before he saw it. So that was a good experience.
Yeah, and this is you ultimately ended up getting co-director credit on a movie we're going to show a clip from, which was called Ultra Warrior or Welcome to Oblivion.
Originally, the original title was Welcome to Oblivion. Yes.
And this is kind of amazing also because it sort of sets up what you ended up doing a lot with Alexander Payne, which is voiceover.
Yeah.
It was a very important device in a lot of his films. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but it's something you thought of on your own. So can you explain how you made, first of all, you got hired because you said to the producer, it needs?
A space war. It was, I'll give it a little bit more of a setup. It was, so I had been working there a lot. So they knew me, and I knew Roger's library because I'd been working there for so long. So I knew where shots were and from other movies and stuff like that. And I had even worked on a movie where we just stole footage from other movies and then shot a few actors in cars driving, and we had car chases. And so we did that. So I knew the whole library, and Roger had this movie that he had produced in Peru or bought from, no, he produced it. And it was terrible. And by the way, it's still terrible if you see it. But they didn't know what to do with it, and they basically showed it to me and said, what do you think we should do? And as a joke, I said, I think it needs a space war. And the head of the company at that point, Mike Elliott, just laughed and goes, okay, go. And, so I started getting into cutting a space war, you know, putting like a Star Wars banner on a thing at the front that describes what the world was like and everything like that. But then I started going deeper into it, and I thought that maybe it was so boring.
Post-apocalyptic, looking for this.
There's zirconium, which is like, that's what the plot is. And but it was all so badly done on every level that I just was sitting there. I was like, well, what if each character has a flashback to what their life was before the atom bomb went off and ruined the world? And I started doing that. And because I knew the library, I was just going through tons of footage, and I would find, you know, desert battles and Vietnam footage. I think there's even some of that in there. But I totally scored in the sequence, in the little clip we're going to watch, because I found the actor from Welcome to Oblivion in a submarine movie. And so I'm like, oh my God, this is great. He's the same guy. He's going to flash back to himself. So I just rewrote this narration and took all of Roger's submarine movies, and there's probably like 5 different movies in this clip of Roger films.
And also, but then you were worried it was too much Hunt for Red October-ish, so you had an Abyss-like.
Yeah, there's Roger was always making movies that were knockoffs of the movies that were coming out. Like, he was always ahead of them too, and he made them so much faster. So like, his Abyss movie came out before the Abyss came out, but of course no one saw it. But that's how he worked, and maybe he made money because he sold it overseas. You know, I don't know. And sometimes he had the same scripts because he would own the scripts, or it was like James Cameron had worked at Rogers, and I think that the Abyss actually was one where he owned.
But it's, you said ultimately that in this movie, this is an astounding number to me, that you actually used probably 25 different movies from the library. You said if you needed to find a woman with 3 breasts dancing, you knew where.
I knew where it was. I knew where it was, and we used that in. And I still think, I cannot believe studios don't do that today. They have all these movies. They have, warehouses full of movies that no one's seen. They should go back, get that footage, and reuse it.
But don't you think it's such an interesting training ground for an editor to they let you go, and that you had to figure out how to get an audience involved and have plot and.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to show the first clip. It's fantastic.
They get better after this. Promise.
Pretty amazing.
Pretty silly.
So I have to say, it's so I've interviewed over 60 editors, and every editor, there's one thing that they all have in common, which is that, when a door does open, when the opportunity knocks, that they are ready.
Right.
And it can be as simple as just working under the table, give me anything you've got, just cutting, and just getting experience. Because if you hadn't done all that, and that opportunity somehow you had met, well, first it was Tamara Davis, but then Alexander Payne, you were ready.
Right.
And it's always that story of, so the moral of that story is just keep cutting whenever you can. Try to get someone to look at it too, but just the experience of trial and error and
I'm a huge believer in that, and I tell young editors that all the time, that they should just, if you know, cutting their brother's wedding video, it doesn't matter. They should just be cutting stuff and experimenting and trying things, and you'll build up your confidence level, and then doors will open, and if you're ready, you'll feel confident and be able to walk into them and then go to the next step. That's at least how it's worked for me.
Well, it's always the case.
Right.
I mean, it's just different ways that the experience came. Yours was quite unique. So you the first break came with Tamara Davis,
Yeah.
who had done a lot of music videos, very
Right.
interesting art indie director, or
Yeah.
that film Gun Crazy that you did with her.
Yeah, so Tamara also went to LA City College, which was, so I knew her from there. And then we ran into each other at the supermarket, and I said, you know, what are you doing? Or she said, what am I doing? And I was like, I'm still editing. I go, what are you doing? She's doing music videos. And then she goes, and I think I have a feature, my first feature about to do. Do you want to cut it? And I was like, sure. And then that was it. And then we cut that movie, and it came out really good. It was one of the early independent films. Like, it played here in New York, and I remember Bill Nicholson from Sound One called me and said, oh my God, that was so great, and that was so sweet. And but so I was doing Roger movies, like, to keep money and to keep alive, and then I was doing little art films like Tamara's on the side, because those were even.
It's interesting. You did some very brave stylistic things. That it was kind of film noir,
Yeah.
Badlands, kind of.
Yeah, it's a cool little movie.
And I was asking you because you're very brave and creative in terms of experimentation. You said you were doing some stuff with jump cutting already then.
What we're talking about upstairs?
Yeah.
That was before pre-fluid morphs.
Right.
Jump cuts, yeah.
Right, but that you were already had that curiosity and
Right.
that sort of courage to do it, which led to using technology later. But I thought that was interesting that you were
Right.
already doing that. So you ended up then meeting Alexander Payne, who was, what I want to ask you is, you had a reel that he
Yeah.
liked.
Yeah.
What was on that reel?
Okay, so I don't think Salt the Hidden Threat was on there, but there was a scene from Gun Crazy, and he thought it was all intentional, but it starts out with a crane shot that goes on for about 45 seconds or something like that, with no cuts in it, and it settles into this two-shot of these kids. And we didn't cut it all because our theory at the time was thinking that it was building up, and then it got really violent really quick, and then we got really cutty. But we held off on cutting for quite a while, but I think we just didn't have the coverage, if I remember correctly. I'm not quite sure why we did that, but Alexander thought it was amazing that we didn't cut for so long. And he saw that on my reel, and he wanted to meet with me, and we met, and he liked Gun Crazy, and he liked the idea that I worked at Roger Corman.
Why? I'm curious about that too.
That he liked why, because I think he wishes he could have at one point in his career gone down and worked at Roger Corman's.
Because it was just kind of
It was kind of a fun place where you could do whatever. Yeah, so.
And so was it on that film that the studio did not want?
Yeah. So on Citizen Ruth.
Citizen Ruth, their first film.
His first movie, and it was for Harvey, and it was a Miramax film, and they were pushing much bigger editors with way more credits, and like substantial credits at him, and he was resistant to that. And he had said at the time, or I don't know if he said it then or later, but he just said that he wanted to have a partner. He didn't want to have like a granddad telling him what to do. So he wanted to explore on his own and learn to edit, with me. And he's a very good editor in his own right too. Even then he was. So that's really why I think when we got along, we just kind of.
And you said you had aligned sort of sensibilities. And
Yeah.
I think what's also interesting, which you'll see when we show the clips and talk about the films, is that you started on, you did his first film, you've done all his films with him, and you've both evolved. You've also changed styles and changed genres, but just going through 24 plus years together and evolving as filmmakers, you kind of see all the different turns you took.
Right.
It's fun to watch that. So, for example, Citizen Ruth, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's very broad, and it's already he's satirizing both pro-life and
Right.
abortion rights.
Pro-choice, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a satirical side, and there's also this thing which you do a lot in your films together is this sort of tragic comic, making someone kind of unlikable, borderline unlikable, but likable somehow. And it's
Right.
you walk a tough line in all these films and succeed. And I think it's very interesting, and I have a feeling that gets honed in the cutting room, this kind of balance.
Yeah, we're definitely we definitely hone it in the cutting room, but a lot of it goes to his writing partner Jim Taylor and Alexander when they're concocting these stories and these characters and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, there's so many things like you get to the point where there's so much tension, or you're so uncomfortable, or you're so miserable, and then there's a relief, and you didn't just at the right time, and there's all these things are so finessed that I'm sure it is the writing, but it's also
we play with the timing.
Performance. Of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we do all day long.
So how many of you have seen Election? A lot. So it's funny, we were just talking about Election was not a success when it came out, partly because the studio didn't understand that it wasn't a teen comedy.
Right.
It got a second life, and it's
Yeah.
really very much appreciated now, and it was made in 1999. And you got an Emmy nomination for that.
I did.
I mean, an Eddie, sorry.
Yeah, an Eddie. Yeah. Which I couldn't believe.
And social satire about high school, but also these two main characters, Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick, were very. How would you describe them?
Realistic.
She was obsessively, obnoxiously ambitious, and he
Right.
was petty and jealous and small-minded.
Right. Yeah, those are very good descriptions. Absolutely. Realistic.
But, and yet you sort of don't hate them, and it's very. And so the other thing that happened, and this is your evolving as filmmakers, is you really experimented a lot. You did a lot of crazy stylistic things, like there was a lot of freeze framing on her face, or. And the other thing, which was the beginning of using you use voiceover in a lot of different ways. In this movie, they had 4 different characters' points of view in voiceover.
Right.
And in this case, were they unreliable narrators? No, they weren't.
Yeah, they were
Sometimes they're unreliable narrators, but and that's funny too, because
that is funny, yeah.
They're lying to the audience, so you know that they're lying, so you discover something about them.
Right. I guess some of them, like maybe in Election, maybe Jim McAllister's lying to the audience, but Tracy's not, I don't think.
And what did you get? You had to pay Alexander money for what?
There's a sequence where Matthew Broderick gets caught throwing the election to one of the other characters. And so Alexander wanted to cut it like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, where we held, and we cut it this way, and we lived with it for quite a while, and he kept trying to make it work, and we kept shortening it, but he wanted real long shots of everyone looking, and then cutting, and then looking, and cutting, and looking, and it took forever. So I paid him $75 to cut it the way I wanted to cut it, and then we previewed it, and everyone thought, "Oh, that's great!" And he actually invoiced me. I wish I had the invoice. I had owed him money for lunch too, and I think the invoice says $84.18 or something like that. And I don't know where it is anymore. I have to look for it.
But that was a really ballsy sequence. I mean, that was like rapid.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the emotion.
That. Yeah. We were trying to be visceral and emotional, but that movie, we were talking upstairs that movie, we did everything in it. I mean, we have dissolves, we have freeze frames, we have split screens, we have everything. Music's changing all the time, and voiceover, and that's what's kind of fun about it. We just did everything.
Because it's a wild story too. And so it's sort of.
And it's a microcosm of,
And the energy of youth and high school, and it's like style works when it's used appropriately for what you're trying to tell, and it just was so appropriate for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's something he's never gotten over. That 20 seconds you took out.
I know, he still brings that up. Yeah. Yeah, well, we cut one. I talked him into cutting out. Well, first of all, it was too long. It's not my fault. It was too long. So I talked him into cutting this one thing out that it's the only thing after all these years that he still brings up that really irks him. So he'll bring it up every couple of years. Just a quick little scene. It was 20 seconds, but.
But it was an editorial thing because you wanted to get to this moment and you lost momentum.
Yes, it was a momentum killer, and that's what I told him then, and I still believe that. I'm sticking
and it
to my
was just
story.
like a hello in the hallway that killed the momentum.
Yeah, it was like a 20. He just passed another teacher in the hallway right at this really critical moment, but he liked that. He thought that was great. I don't know. Usually, we don't usually worry about. He doesn't get upset about too many things, but that's one that he seems to be obsessed with still. So.
So we're going to show a clip from Election, and if you wouldn't mind setting up.
This is the posters?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is just, it's just a fun clip, but what else would I kind of say about it? We used a Morricone song track from a movie, an old Western called Navajo Joe, which we started out as a joke using, but then we realized that it was really fun, and actually what he said about Tracy in this sequence is that with that music, you just love her. So when we were talking about her not being totally likable, he felt this was something that helped. And then he told me that a couple of years later that Quentin Tarantino had pulled him aside and said that he was jealous that Alexander was the first one to use a Morricone track in another different movie. So, and it was a real big pain to get it, but we got it. So. And there's a scream at the beginning of it, so we used that for anytime Tracy was, and that was just playing around in the cutting room.
I was going to ask you about that. How did you generate that?
That is from the track. That's from Navajo Joe, the movie.
Oh.
And so we just kept reusing it, and then we used it like 2 other times in the movie. So whenever Tracy's really stressed, she hears this screaming in her head, and that was just a joke.
And it's such a weird. Well, you'll hear it. It's such a eerie, disturbing sound.
Yeah. But and then I think it's set up a couple times so we know the audience knows the scream. They're used to it. The scream happens here, but then the song kicks in. So it was like that's a setup, right?
Yeah.
Was I supposed to say anything else?
No.
Nope.
It's great. It's amazing the energy of that clip, and it's cartoonish. It's like when the poster.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right.
It's great.
It's fun. It's fun.
So that was her opponent's poster.
Yeah. And then I don't know if you remember the movie. For those who haven't seen it, that becomes the big scandal of the whole movie. Who tore down the posters, and it becomes the whole story of the rest of the movie. But yeah, it's fun, and Reese is just so delightful in that.
In fact, she said that, which you didn't even know, that she was so associated. This became such a powerful sort of impact in terms of associating that actress with this character that initially, after that, she had trouble getting work. Ultimately, obviously, she did okay.
Yeah, she's doing all right now.
We'll cry for her later. But,
yeah, exactly.
So the same year, you had a busy year that year,
Yeah.
1999, wasn't
Yeah.
it? You worked with James Mangold on Girl Interrupted.
Right.
Slightly different.
Totally different movie, and my first big budget movie, and that was it freaked me out at the time. But at one time, I remember in the cutting room at one point, I'm like, oh, it's just film. It's just more expensive film. I don't have to worry about it. I'll just do my job and not worry about it. And it was we spent like 3 or 4 months in Harrisburg, Nebraska, shooting. And should I set up the clip? Let's talk about the clip, or
yeah, but I wanted to also mention that you or ask you about the fact that he shot a ton. It was very long, right?
Yeah.
This was including the clip we're going to show.
Right.
In this clip, what did you say? He was just wandering the hallways and.
Yeah. So to set up this, there's a sequence in the movie when he was shooting. If he saw an opportunity to shoot something, he had this idea of shooting these rotating scenes, and then he was going to cut them all together to kind of make this dizzying experience. And he would just shoot them every day if he saw something. He would just get the actors to do this thing, and the camera would be moving. So he shot a lot of. There's a whole bunch of stories about the movie as a whole, but he shot. I think the first cut was like, I can't really remember, but I think it's like 2 hours and or maybe it was over 3 hours.
I think you said 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, it might have been 3 hours and 20 minutes. It was something ridiculous. And I remember I called him. He had already gone back to California, and I was finishing in Harrisburg, or he called me. I can't remember. He was like, "Well, how long is it?" And I go, "I think it's fine. It's like 3 hours and 20 minutes." And he freaked out. He's like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna?" And I totally lied. I'm like, "Don't worry, we're fine. It's gonna be fine. We'll cut it down. We'll cut it down." But inside, I was like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do? This is scary." But anyways, we started cutting it down, and we dropped a bunch of backstories and focused it in, and anyways, in this sequence that we're going to see, which I still think it's really kind of cool. We were working on a Saturday, and we were in the process of removing shots because he had too many of them, and I think I suggested, what if we just start dissolving these sequences together? And we had an Avid, and then what if we superimpose, and we just use all the negative space in each shot and try to put something else in there and kind of checkerboard it, and then put another checkerboard on top and try to see what that would look like. And we had a blast, and we did this on a Saturday. And I was trying to remember when Bobbie and I were speaking, like, why did we not change it? We always had intended to go back and change it, but at that time we were still previewing and such on film, so we had to actually make this and for a preview screening. And when we went to go make it, it cost $12,000, which at that time was a lot of money. And so we were like, oh, we're going to go back and tweak it. And our producer, Kathy Conrad, said, no, you're not. That cost $12,000. That's it. So this is exactly what we did on that Saturday. And it came out pretty great.
It's beautiful. The other thing that's interesting is that they didn't want to hire Angelina Jolie.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was a nobody, and she won an Oscar and sort of became someone, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. And that is absolutely true. Jim had to fight to get her in the movie because I don't think she had done anything really. So.
But this is you did such a beautiful job on this. So we'll run the clip now.
I think what also kind of works, it's a really dark, not dark, but it's a pretty bleak existence, and there's a bit of lightness here and happiness and fun for the girls, and then it's undercut, which is just so tragic with Martin Luther King footage. I get, just watching that now, I'm like, ooh, it's hard.
But also, I love the way you settled into it.
Right.
You had a lot going on in terms of
it came down and stopped.
Yeah, so it had more impact.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know how you did that on a Saturday because
Did it on a Saturday.
How to line up, like you had sometimes 5 things going on, 4 maybe?
At least 4,
at least 4 that would make.
Points, there's so many things going on.
I love the way it sort of peaks with the pills and it's really
because they're all
great.
medicated.
Yeah, and it just the camera movement works so beautifully. Yeah. Great. Oh yeah, and you originally cut that to "I Am a Walrus"?
Yes, I think that's right. We did. That was the song, and it actually works. If you line that up, if you go home and line that up, you can watch it with that. But the Wilco song winds up working great. We couldn't afford the "I Am a Walrus," so.
No, I think this is.
It works. Yeah.
So the next film you did with Alexander is about Schmidt.
Yeah.
2002.
Yeah.
Another Eddie nomination.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other, a little different from Election. This is about it's a very slow, sort of interior older man.
Right.
Played by Jack Nicholson. Never did anything remotely like this because you had to tamp him down.
Right. Yeah.
Couldn't have the eyebrows going crazy and the wild energy. This was someone who was really very, how would you describe this character? I mean, it's just...
like an old curmudgeon,
Yeah.
He's like this old grumpy guy.
Who didn't express himself at all. He was just completely bottled up.
He was an actuary and just was not a happy person probably ever, or maybe he was once. I guess he was once, but yeah. And we... Absolutely. I remember Alexander saying when we when he was still in the writing process, or when when we were starting to talk about it, that he didn't want to. He wanted to do exactly the opposite of what we did in Election. He wanted to do more of a character study and less cuts, and try to really focus in on him and not make it flashy or anything like that. Nothing distracting in the cutting is what he, I think.
And to a certain extent, that started a trend that played out to a degree in all your films.
Yeah,
after
I
that
think
performance-driven and really trusting to stay with the character.
Yeah.
The nuance play out.
Right. I'm going to try to talk him into doing something more like Election next time, though. I really do think he should. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's liberating.
Mix it up.
Yeah. But this was, I mean, it's again, this way the humor snuck up on you, and in fact, the clip we're going to show is actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is Kathy Bates is also in it, and she can be a larger-than-life actress, too, and how you were able to get, you said did a lot of takes.
Yeah.
But they were all different and all interesting. Like, he really could suppress the Jack Nicholson.
Jack was great, and they definitely, when Bobbie and I were talking earlier, that they definitely, Alexander did not want him to play Jack Nicholson. He wanted him to play Warren Schmidt. So that was like one thing that he was really adamant about. And on the set, they tried to keep Jack from doing any Jackisms. And in the cutting room, we for sure were like diligent about making sure that Jack didn't do anything. And he did stuff, but we would cut around it or cut it out or do something else. And there's only a couple things that my little Jack radar goes up. But other than that, and this scene is probably the one where we let him get most like Jack Nicholson. But
he's pretty.
He's pretty.
I mean, I even wonder if he can control those eyebrows. Maybe he can.
I think he can.
It's like,
I don't know.
I don't know. It's just.
Question.
But here's an interesting way you used the voiceover in a completely different way. In this movie, and it was.
There was for those of you who haven't seen it. It was Jim and Alexander's great writing, but their device to do this voiceover was that Warren Schmidt was sending money and letters to a little kid in Africa, one of those care things, like he adopted a kid and was sending him money. But when he sent him money, he also sent him long letters, and so the voiceover through the whole movie winds up, the audience loves it. The first time they think, oh, he's just telling us how he feels and he's going to send off this letter. They don't suspect that he's going to start doing this all through his whole journey, and it's really funny.
I mean, can we say the spoiler? The spoiler.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but yeah, go ahead.
that you don't know if you're going to get emotional payoff, and then you find out the kid got all these letters and how he. So it's very emotional because he doesn't really get any satisfaction through the whole movie, Jack Nicholson's character, except at the end. But the other thing is you're sort of startled when you hear these voiceovers because, you can't read him, and he's so stoic, and he's not. And then he comes out with this anger and this commentary, and he is an unreliable narrator because some of his versions aren't even true.
Right. Yeah. A lot of
But this thing of finding that balance between comedy and drama and letting you sort of build, and then that little release that you get, like in the clip we're showing, there's a lot of sort of depressing stuff, and then you have these ways you release it when it's character driven, and it works.
It winds up being so funny. Yeah. So in the movie, his daughter's marrying a guy who sells waterbeds, who he just hates, and he's going to go and try to stop her from marrying them. And he goes to and his wife had just died, so he's going through a lot of stuff. Anyways, he winds up sleeping in the waterbed at his future in-law's house, and he strains his neck, which is also hilarious. But there's all these setups, and Jim and Alexander are so good at it. They just casually in the beginning of the movie, in one of the letters, mention that she's working, that Jeannie is, in love with this guy who, and they don't even say waterbeds. You just see him walking out in front of a waterbed store. But that's all you need to know, and then we're not going to see that part here. But anyways, then he lays in the side of waterbed, and it's hysterical when he does that. But yeah, and the movie's not really funny until it gets to Kathy Bates's house, I'd say. Then it really becomes funny.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting.
And everything that comes out of her mouth, you just don't see coming at all.
Yeah.
Like this.
She's a great character. Yeah.
So we'll show the clip.
Okay, here we go.
Well, that first reaction is that a total betrayal, because he told his daughter that she
Yeah.
shouldn't marry her son,
Yeah.
and she springs it on him. And
Yeah, it's in context. It's even funnier, hopefully. But yeah, there's nothing really fancy about the cutting there. It's just choices with Jack, like how to. And we played around with a lot with that, like how long we held on before he did anything and stuff like that. But
I mean, but that's where you see good editing, is when it's this simple, and it's just a
Simple, yeah.
matter of timing and
Right.
who, if you're seeing who you want to see
Right.
at the right time.
Right, yeah, and saying the right things.
That's good
and
editing.
Kathy says so many zingers in that scene. She does it to the whole movie. She says hilarious things to the whole thing.
And she does end up naked in the hot tub with him.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and so another interesting thing about this movie is things started to change in terms of your process with
Yes.
Alexander.
Yeah.
So, and they have a very unusual way of working together.
Yep.
Originally, an editor runs a full assembly of his cut with the editor, his
Yeah.
or her cut.
Yeah.
And that's very traumatic for everybody. And then he didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, on About Schmidt, so that was a tough one. It was a tough one to cut, and it was long and all sorts of stuff. But normally, you do the assembly, and then the director comes in and watches it, and it's horrible, and they freak out, and then you start working on it. And on About Schmidt is where we started changing our process, where he didn't want to. I think he watched the first half when I was in Omaha. We were in Omaha cutting, or I showed him as much as I had. It was probably half the movie. And he didn't want to see anymore while he was shooting. It just got him to, it just kind of distracted him. And so that was not good. So from that point on, we started not watching my assembly. I still do one. But the way we work now is that he doesn't watch anything I do. He comes into the cutting room fresh, and we start watching dailies, and we start building scenes on our own together. And then we'll go back and look at what I did. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we watch a big chunk, sometimes we don't. And if he likes something he sees that I did, a lot of times it's the same because we have similar tastes in our performance choices and stuff like that. But we basically do a first assembly director's cut. It's longer than probably a first director's cut would be, but it's better than an editor's assembly. So it takes more time. But he's at a place in his career where he can ask for that, and it's not a big deal. And so that's what he does, and that's what we do now.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing, didn't you stop watching dailies together at that point too?
Yeah, About Schmidt was, on Sideways, I still went up and watched some dailies with him.
Right.
Yeah,
but not the full.
Not the full. We didn't do dailies every day like we did on. Yeah, this was old school. We still projected dailies at the end of days or on Saturdays. We'd start going through dailies. But again, he shot a lot, so we get through 2 days of dailies, and then everyone would be exhausted and want to just go home. So, but yeah, we stopped doing that. But you know what? It's good because, as he says, I was there when they shot it, and he likes a little distance from it. So when he sees the takes again, he'll remember. Oh, I think there's a good one coming up here. I think I like this one. But it's good for him to see it fresh again. So, and it gives me a chance to know the footage too. So if I do an assembly, so we're kind of on an even playing field when we actually sit down to go to work.
Yeah. So I'm just going to give you a few quotes because they're so great. So at the Eddies in 2012, he got a special award from ACE, American Cinema Editors, and he talked about it, and he said that he stopped watching assembly. Life is too goddamn short for this particular brand of severe depression. Allows me to think more clinically like an editor, not like a director, in love with his material. I want to approach the footage fresh, and I want to join Kevin in the process of viewing and eventually memorizing all of our footage. As we reach each new scene, he shows me his version of the scene that would have appeared in the assembly. Often he has a marvelous idea that never would have occurred to me, and often I think, what other editor might be available?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like Alexander.
This process allows our ideas to ripen to know where the peaks and valleys are. I am helpless without him. Our collaboration is essentially one of co-writing the final draft. If more directors would please say that.
That's sweet. I know,
But
I know.
it's-
He's
what an
a
editor.
very generous man, and he's great.
And he also said that you go home every night with the blood of actors on your breath.
Yeah.
Because you say things like the milkman
Yeah.
is driving by and
Yeah.
man overboard.
Man
and-
overboard, yeah. All the editors here know we say, if the actors knew what we were saying, they'd be crying. But hope they don't, so it's good.
But he also talks about, that how essential he talks to you during lunch break when he's
Yeah.
shooting, and you will have seen the dailies.
Yeah.
And he lives and breathes by what you say, because he can read you, your truth. Either you're truthful or you reveal your truth somehow.
Yeah, maybe it's one of those,
Yeah.
those two things.
But I think he says, to get that phone call, I just wait for that phone call from Kevin,
It's true. We talk pretty much every day when he's shooting, when we can.
He says, Kevin is my audience. I hunger to please him. So there. Okay, enough.
That was very
I think
sweet.
I got off quotes there. But it's funny, going back to the Roger Corman days, he says you have no, this is, of course, all editors identify with this, but no patience for fat or excess of any kind.
Yeah.
It was good training.
Totally good training. Yes, it was absolutely good training.
So we're doing fine. But in case I forget, I'm going to bring this up now because I always like to bring this up.
Okay.
Now that we've blown a lot of smoke up your whatever.
Yeah, thank you.
I also wanted to ask you, because I ask every editor this question, all you successful, talented editors, do you ever have self-doubt?
Every day. Every day I do. Yeah, absolutely.
What are the hardest or the most vulnerable things, or what you feel, or when do you feel them? And
Well, even the thing I'm working on now, I have anxiety about it. I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Of course it can always change, and but you want to do a good job, and you see problems on the horizon, and how can you fix them before they become even noticeable, and and you also feel like you have to constantly be doing a great job, and at least I push myself to also be like creative and try to think differently on things, and what can I do on this scene that I haven't done before, and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think everybody has.
it's just good to hear it, because
anxiety, and yeah.
it's good to hear that you're not alone. If you're a creative person, I think it's part of. If you're too complacent, then you're not growing and you're not challenging yourself.
Yeah, and if you start thinking that you know everything, and I don't, and I'm always telling myself, because I don't, like so many times I'm like, no, that's really important that stays that way, and then later I'm like, why did I think that? Who cares? It's fine the way it is now. Or if Alexander and I are tussling over a take or a performance, and you think you're right, but you can't, that's not a good place to be. You got to step back and go, what do I know?
Yeah.
Which I do all the time.
Or sometimes I hear, am I a fraud? Are they going to find me out?
Yeah,
or you start a new film, have I lost my touch?
Oh, yeah. I think that all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. So Sideways.
Yeah.
Here's another couple of characters that are, you could love them or hate them.
Right, yeah.
Very, and this was, you said, a guerrilla
Yeah.
of a film, because
The script was 146 pages or 140, I can't remember. It was a big script, and again, he just shot a lot of stuff, and it just took a while to get it down to a good fighting weight, and it was tough. And there's a lot of fun things to talk about in Sideways, but Thomas Hayden Church was in it, and we realized he was like a really strong spice, and he could overpower a scene so easily. So we were constantly regulating how much he could say in it. But as we kept screening it for audiences, we could tell that they were just hungry for him to say something in a scene, and it was so great when we held off. And then he had one of his zingers, and they just loved it. So
and you could, that timing, it was great.
Yeah, it was mostly taking stuff away, because if he was left to his own devices, he would have been blabbing all, eating up a whole scene. I don't want to make it sound like he's eating up the whole scene, but like he could be overpowering. you could be overpowering. And
Yeah.
we were definitely conscious of regulating him.
But
Michael
all-
Barabaum can attest to that too.
But also, Paul Giamatti is such a brilliant actor, and you get into the darkness of his character, but you were going to do something that you didn't end up using. You didn't need it because his performance showed that dark side. But
yeah, there was Alexander had shot sequences of him like floating down the river Styx on a boat with all these ghostly white people in a boat and rowing, and they actually shot it all. And I was like, that's never gonna make it in the movie. But I didn't tell him that. But
the editors self-speak, right?
yeah, I saw it right away. I was like, I don't think so. But
don't
and it
you?
didn't make it in. But he shot it.
But this sequence, which I always love so much, it's so beautifully edited because I didn't know the backstory. I mean, they shot it over 3 days.
I think two
days.
nights, 2 full nights. Yeah.
Ad-libbing, and
Ad-libbing,
it was a beast. I mean,
It was really a lot, and it was like 3 or 4 scenes like that. It just went on forever, and that was a scene that was we were like, oh, what are we going to do with this? How can we fix this? And we started. Yeah, I forgot. Again, it was like a one-day thing where we were sitting there and we were like, what if we do something like that they did, that Ann Coates did with Soderbergh in Out of Sight, and then we were talking about
Once Upon a Time in America.
Oh yeah, Once Upon a Time in America with the phone, and wait, what's the other one that we did with flash cuts?
Easy Rider.
Easy Rider. So we're starting to talk about those things, and we said, what if we do something like that? So the movie is heavily influenced by those elements, and it helped us truncate the whole thing and tell the story, and also make it feel like what it's like to be at a dinner, getting drunk.
But I also, when you watch it, watch for the way the voices waft in and out.
Yeah.
Is so beautifully crafted, and one of my favorite things is, because this is so editorial, is how Thomas Hayden Church is watching. He's trying to flirt, but at the same time he's watching him go dark, and then what happens afterwards is the iconic line, right?
Yeah.
You didn't drink and dial, did you?
Yeah. Might have been an ad lib. Thomas had hilarious ad libs. He's very funny.
Oh, that was an ad lib?
It might have been.
But you also said to get through the phone call, he went to the bathroom.
He went to the bathroom. They couldn't get in the room. There was all this other stuff. He went to the dark side. He had intended him to go into this dreamy state, in the river Styx and all this stuff, and we got rid of all that stuff. And
but it's just like visually so beautiful, but you're telling so much story. And you said it helped you get through a very crucial sort of middle part of the movie.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a really long movie. I mean, I think it's just over 2 hours, but that was to get through that section was a big, huge thing. And again, it was one of those things we did once we realized what we wanted to do, we did it fast. But I had cut that. I had already started doing the montagey thing. I had that happening, which goes back to sort of what we did in Girl Interrupted.
Right.
It was not that dissimilar, dissolving and using negative space to put other things and stuff like that. So
you're really good at that.
yeah, Avid helps.
I think you're really good at it. We're going to run the clip now. Thank you. I was trying to count how many bottles they drank.
They drank a lot. I think they actually were drinking too.
But that thing of the phone ringing was so interesting because it sort of seeps into your consciousness.
Yeah.
Just as it does his, making the call.
Yeah, as he becomes more and more.
He's calling his ex-wife.
Yeah, he's calling his ex-wife.
It's a terrible phone call.
Yeah, it goes badly. He shouldn't be calling her. Yeah.
Drink and dial.
Yeah, that was a big sequence.
Yeah.
But it really helped us hugely to get a whole big section of the story done.
And it just says so much about the 2 characters, how they're dealing with this journey anyway, that he's just completely forgetting that he actually is engaged to someone, and he can't get out of his darkness, his head.
Yeah. He gets more and more isolated, which is good. Paul's such a good actor too.
Yeah.
He just does such a great job with that.
and you were so tight on
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just great.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Good so much.
It's a fun one.
So the next, you got an Eddie nomination for that too, and this next one you won an Eddie, and you were nominated for an Academy Award for The Descendants, great film, 2011.
Thank you.
What's also interesting about Descendants is you had done a pilot that he had executive produced, Hung, but you had actually not done a feature in almost 7 years. There was just a break in his making films.
Alexander,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So was there any change that you noticed in
his style or anything like that? Well, actually, he
Or
had been
you.
working. Oh, and me?
you or him or both?
No, I think we kind of fell right back into, how we worked together and stuff like that. I think, you know what? I do remember there being a little bit of nervousness when he first came back to the cutting room because we hadn't been, it was a long time. But we would still see each other socially, and we're still pals and everything like that. But yeah, when we sat down to work, I do remember that. He had been writing Downsizing and had tried to get that off the ground a number of times, and it kept going, and then, it would not happen, and then, another year would go by, and then him and Jim produced a couple of movies. So they just, next thing you know, 7 years went by. So this one came up, this is the one that he also didn't write completely with Jim, or, it was a script that they had in development, and that he decided to jump on. So, and it's, it's good. I think it's,
One of the interesting things about this film is you talk a lot about when we talk about the walking the line between comedy and drama, and that he made a choice. He was worried about the melodrama.
Yeah. So when shooting, he shot a lot, and he shot a lot of options, and we had a little girl actress, and there was a lot of elements that were, and I think he was maybe even a little nervous about working with George Clooney and stuff like that. So he shot a lot, and in the script, I think they were worried about it being just too dark and too melodramatic, so they wrote a lot of comedy stuff in it. And as we were editing it, it just seemed to be getting in the way, and it also, to me, it seemed inconsiderate to the tragedy that the characters were going through. It just seemed like it was being forced. And so as we were going through the movie and cutting, it was sort of consciously, but also subconsciously, it was getting taken out and becoming more streamlined and less trying to be funny. And there are funny moments in it, but it's not like forced. And that was absolutely, something that we were, as the film evolved, that happened.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a maturity too.
It's a maturity thing, absolutely. I think so too. Yeah, I think he thought, but I guess, when anyone's directing a movie, you don't know. You're hoping that your ideas are coming across. But I can see why he would be worried that it might be melodramatic. But I don't think it wound up not being so.
And in this film, he uses voiceover in a different way because there's a lot of voiceover at the beginning and then it stops.
Yeah.
And you'll see even in the clip we show, which is about 10 minutes in, there's a lot of exposition that's taken care of very effectively. And you basically compress this. You got rid of a lot of stuff.
We did. To get the story going, and it was a lot of setup and like technical setup. So that voiceover really served its purpose. It starts the movie out. I think this is like maybe the second or last section of voiceover, and then it disappears. And there were people that were like, "Hey, wait, you have voiceover, and then it just goes away." And what are we gonna do? I think there was more, but we got rid of it. But not at the end.
But I think it's because you get involved in the story, and it wasn't an interior, like it wasn't like about Schmidt. It was getting rid of story that you needed to set up, and then they had the story, and then you rolled with it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The world had to be set up efficiently, and that's what it
and you had to get to the doctor, the scene, but watch for a mismatch in a shirt in this scene.
Oh, coming up the stairs? Well, okay.
Well, because that staircase wasn't going to be there, right?
That's right. Yeah. I forgot about that till just now. You just reminded me. Okay, well.
But also because you use voiceover. It took a while. He went to a store or something.
Yeah, there was a lot of scenes missing. And we used voiceover. We took voiceover from other places and reused it and recut it and condensed it. And then I think we had George redo it too. He did it once for us right after wrap, and then we used that for most of the time. And I think he may have done some more for us. I can't remember on that one.
But you know what else is cool is watch for the, you did it in About Schmidt, I think, too, where you have the push in and go silent.
Yeah. It was a trick we used. We all have a bag of tricks that we use, and that's one that we used again here. But it's very effective.
Watch for it.
Yeah, we didn't invent it. But
watch for the shirt, too.
Yeah, now. It's probably not too late to do a digital fix of that.
Okay, we'll run it now. Thank you. I love the way you waited so long
to see him. Yeah.
Did you do that right?
I'm sure. I don't remember, but I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. George is great in that. You know, his face looks so great. Just those close-ups are amazing.
So now, Nebraska.
Okay, we're just cruising along. Are you guys exhausted?
Or just completely inspired?
Hopefully inspired.
And also, this is, again, a completely different, I mean, it's a little bit, it's a road movie, it's about an older man, but now you really go full on, just completely in a character, very slow, very static, black and white.
Yeah.
Yep. And you loved the faces in black and white. You said
I did. People ask that, like, well, what's it like cutting in black and white? And most of the time, I don't think it really matters. But I did, during the process, feel that I was more attached to the faces. We had such great faces in the movie too. I mean, Bruce's face is amazing, and all of them. So for some reason, I thought that maybe there was something in that. There was something magical happening because it was black and white, that you were seeing these shadows and seeing more of the faces somehow, or focusing more. I don't know if that's true, but.
But it's also the way you showed the landscape and how the landscape became a person, a character in the story, and the dissolves, again, the negative space, and how you use beautiful dissolves. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to also bring up the image manipulation you did.
Yeah.
Kevin does a lot of it, and I think it's really beautifully used. An example being, which I thought was interesting, that you would sometimes actually add a pause to Bruce Dern's performance because he doesn't move a lot, so you were able to.
Yeah.
So
pauses.
Can you talk about some of the ways?
Fluid morphs.
Fluid morph.
Right, yeah. For those of you who work on an Avid out there or know, there's the little fluid morph tool, which allows you the computer will digitally create frames so you can basically take a jump cut and make it invisible. And I'm guilty. I use them a lot.
But see, it's funny because editing is manipulation, and you said initially Alexander thought it was reflecting on the fact that he was a bad director.
Said every time, one time he yelled, he's like, every time you do that, it's saying I'm a bad director. And I said, no, it's not. It's just making the scene better,
Or just speeding something up, or also, of course, comping shots. I
do a lot of comping shots.
Shots.
I think everyone does.
I mean, I don't know. I've never talked about it at an event, actually, but I think it's interesting, like switching out performances, over shoulder, and a two-shot.
Slowing down so someone's not moving and talking. I mean, before we had those tools, you would have people's head shaking, and I always found it distracting, and like, they drop lines out of there so that they could.
But you're doing it as an editor anyway. If an actor's not making it, you're not on them when you should be.
Right.
So you're manipulating away from their performance.
Right.
And this way you might save it.
Yeah.
So but it's just interesting that it's very much of a tool that's, I think, being used more and more. And
I think that's used a lot. I mean,
maybe editors just don't talk about it. I don't know.
I think it's just another thing they do, and they're to make things work better.
But I think you've always been very, even like you said, gun crazy. You like to experiment. You play around with things a lot. You may be a little more adventurous than some other editors. I'm just guessing. You also say that
desperate.
I think you're just trying. I mean, and you said you're aware that sometimes you get too greedy.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about
Well,
that?
sometimes if you're like, oh, I could take, but I have taken whole lines out, and fluid morphed. It's happened in the past where you could actually take a line out if an actor doesn't move too much, and stay on the actor, so you'll have a good line, and you take out the bad line in the middle, and that's worked a couple times.
Or you say sometimes if it's not more than a half a second,
Yeah,
less than a half second, it's not worth it.
Yeah, like if I try to pace things up so it all feels natural still, but yeah, if it's not really, if it doesn't look good and you're not losing like a half a second out of it, then I don't bother with it. If my area is like a half second beat to take out of something is worth it sometimes, so I'll do it.
Yeah.
Less than that, then it's not really worth it.
But it's interesting, like a movie like this, which seems so classic and kind of almost old-fashioned, and yet here you are doing a lot of stuff that is just makes it play for I mean, what I found great about Nebraska is you're never bored. You really, it could be because it's just so slow, but you're so
You
into
get
it.
the rhythm of the movie.
Of the rhythm.
But
It's a
not
world.
for everybody, but I think
It's a world, though, and
Yeah.
it's also that you have this great performance of Bruce Dern and
Yeah.
everybody really, but
and June Squibb, who plays his wife, who's also in About Schmidt.
yeah. But also, you wanted to show this clip because it's a good opportunity to talk about how important endings are and what makes an ending work.
Right. Alexander and Jim, and Alexander in general, I think always has strong endings to his movies, and I think that's one of his gifts, that he's able to pull off. And this movie had a great ending. It just was a good, feel-good ending, and it worked, I think.
And he said something about it's about death, but it's a comedy. So nobody's dying, but it's sort of
Right.
like how you want to go out.
Yeah.
Saying goodbye to everybody and try. I mean, these are all characters that have been important, and it's also a gift. The son, he gets him that truck, right?
Yeah, he buys him a truck, so he can drive it through town, and all the people that thought he was lying.
And he has dementia, so he really can't drive.
Right.
So
Right.
you'll see in the clip, but
Yeah.
it's a beautiful, but a haunting, kind of poignant. It has all the emotions, and it is a beautiful ending.
It is, and there's a beautiful woman actress in it who passed away just a couple years ago, who was his love. Who, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, was his love of his life early on, and she sees him drive by, and she's just amazing. Her face is just incredible, and we held on that shot. I think we even slowed that down so we could hold on it longer.
You manipulated.
We manipulated it, yes.
But yeah, this is a good example too of you really held a long time on the and it just
seemed to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll run the clip.
Okay.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but I think we can quickly show the clip from Downsizing.
Sure, if you want.
Yes, because also it's good to show because it's about giving assistant editors an opportunity to cut, which you are very generous about.
Yeah.
And this was a scene that you had a mount. This is a very ambitious sci-fi movie, and you were overwhelmed with footage, and you gave Angela
Latimer, our second assistant. We just basically he shot so much, and he wasn't completely sure what he wanted to do, but he shot crazy stuff and like people dancing in these cubes and all sorts of wacky stuff. And we basically were buried trying to get the movie together, and that was a sequence that I could tell was going to take a long time. So we said to Angela, come on up here, and here's the footage. And she was so fast and amazing. She did an amazing job. So she did like countless versions of it, and then we caught up, and then we incorporated it into the movie, and it slowly changed, but a lot of the things that she did are still in there.
like the kaleidoscope and
some of that stuff. She went way out there though, which was great. I actually really liked what she had. I would have been happy to see it in the final movie, but she had like dancing stakes with characters in the movie, like animated, like it was like so crazy. But she was enormously helpful on it.
And what's your deal with this? You say, we'll let you cut to the assistants as long as we can steal it.
Yeah, we can steal it. Yeah, you're giving it to the team.
So we're going to show that clip.
Yeah. So it changed quite a bit, but still a lot of it's the same. Or some of it's the same.
So we have to have some Q&A, I'm sure.
Okay.
People want to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bobbie. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Are we doing Q&A? Yes? Okay. Do you want to pick the people, or do you want?
No, somebody else do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I worked for Roger too.
Oh.
I worked on Battle Beyond the Stars.
Oh, yeah, I
I've been
stole from
before
that.
you. Yeah, and it was like the Magnificent Seven in space.
Right.
And he had been. I worked in the model shop. I wasn't in the editing room. I was in where they were shooting the spaceships flying by.
Yeah. Were you in Venice?
Venice, yeah,
Yeah,
Venice,
yeah,
the
that was-
model shop, yeah, in Venice
Right, yeah,
Beach
yep.
on Main Street.
Right.
And they'd been shooting the models for about a year. And I was on it for about 6 months, and then they brought the actors in, and they had Richard Thomas, George
Yeah.
Papard, all starred, Robert Vaughn,
Yeah.
a lot of famous guys, John Saxon. They shot that stuff really quickly. And then at that point, Roger had the movie booked into like 400 theaters. And the model guys just wanted to keep going, shooting the little ships flying by. And Roger said, we got to pull the plug on this. And I said, well, we've got the ships going this way. We need them going this way. He said, you just flop the negative.
Right.
That's all you have to do.
Right.
So he just pulled the plug on the whole thing. And
that's
the
funny.
movie went out. He had to cut the negative, and that was it.
Right. I believe it.
Yeah,
I believe it.
no.
Yeah. And I stole footage from that movie.
Really?
Absolutely. And yes.
He morphed that into another movie called Galaxy of Terror.
Yeah. And I
after
think
that,
Forbidden
too.
Planet too.
Yeah.
That stuff.
Oh,
got
right,
used a
right.
lot. Yep.
Amazing, yeah, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a very simple question, and I thought every editor met this issue before, and they dealing with it in a different way. So when you met an issue that the director don't want to cut their baby,
Yeah.
and how do you negotiate with them? Do you have your specific way to
Do I have
deal with it?
my ways?
Yeah.
No, I think you have to be really patient if it's something they really don't want to lose, and you just have to wait. I mean, I sort of have my timing issues of when I bring things up, and a lot of times things get decided after audiences see it or other people bring things up. But usually I have my little rule, like I'll bring things up 3 times subtly, and maybe the 3rd time I hit a little harder. And if I get a lot of pushback, I wait and kind of like to see what happens. But you know, if you really truly believe that it's the right way to go, you got to keep nudging it that way. But if you know, ultimately the director, they have to do what they want to do, and you can only advise them so far. So, but I try to be subtle. Try.
But I mean, that's a really good question, because you've used the analogy of the relationship between a director and editor is like a marriage, and it's picking your battles too.
Yeah.
And the ones you really want to go to the mat on,
Yeah.
you'll fight for.
And like I said earlier too, you know, movies evolve and change. So what you think is so important at one point, as the movies change, maybe it's not an issue anymore. So again, I go back to what I said earlier. Is like, often I don't know. So I mean, I have my instincts. If something's really bad, I know it's got to go. But you know, you kind of got to work together. And you're an advisor. So you're an advisor to the president. Let's say you have to tell him what you think he should do. So, and then they have to make their own decisions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions?
You probably don't need the microphone. Oh, maybe you do. I don't know.
Hi.
Hi.
When you were talking about Sideways and how you needed some kind of chapter marker, if you will, like at the hour point, somewhere in the middle, because it was a 2-hour, kind of a longish movie, and it was 2 hours long. I was just thinking about how now, with episodic being such a huge thing, and you don't. Editing might be a little different because you might live with these characters for years and years. But I just wonder, do you think there's something in the human psyche where you need some resolution, like once per hour, like with something you're watching? And if so, is that just something we've been conditioned to, or is it just kind of natural when you're watching something if you don't have, not resolution or something that kind of, as you had said, that is like a marker, or if not resolution, then something of a different substance than the rest of it, of maybe a more dramatic substance.
Right. I think that whatever the context of what it is you're working in, if it's an episodic television or a movie or whatever, you can't, it's really bad to lose the engagement of the audience. So I think in Sideways, for example, there was a lot of stuff going on, and we needed something to give it a little boost at that time to keep the narrative going and to keep people engaged. They get tired and exhausted too. You can't get things going on forever. So, and I always think that if you lose their engagement, it's really hard to get it back. So, but you raise an interesting point. Are we conditioned to think that way and feel that way? And I think we are to a certain extent. I think we're now getting conditioned to, be less patient all the time. Like, we want everything so quickly, and I don't know what that means in the long run.
And yet we're willing to watch unlimited hours of
right.
same thing. Like, if we like the formula, we're willing to watch, hundreds of hours of this Western or this thriller or whatever it is,
Right.
We want immediate gratification, but not a
Right.
closed
Well,
amount.
it's interesting how everything's changing with the formats of how we watch stuff and are entertained. I think it's really fascinating. I don't know where it's going, but it's interesting. So I hope that was an answer to somewhat of the question. Close enough.
I don't think you need making this guy run.
With the vast amount of dailies that you get in the footage that just, I'm sure, inundate you, like you said, your assistant was able to help you out with downsizing. Do you start with the scenes that are like the quickest and easiest for you to get to? That way you can kind of lighten your load, or do you start with the more difficult scenes? That way, by the time they're done, you're a little bit more relieved.
You know what? I play it by ear. I truly just go by, if I have like 3 or 4 scenes to cut, I just do whatever I feel like at that time. So if if I know there's a big scene in the afternoon, I might do a couple of easy ones in the morning to get, started up, but it's always different. It's kind of whatever I feel like doing, if I have that option of having a few to cut. But yeah, I kind of just jump around.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have time for Josh? One more? Way back there. I'm
Make
really
you
gonna
run.
make you run.
Thank you so much for a wonderful program. If I could ask you, what would you say are 1 or 2 mistakes that new or novice editors make?
I don't know. Maybe they should watch out for taking things too personally. Maybe if cuts change, because editors work so hard, and it happens to me too. You work so hard on getting something to work, and then somebody comes in and just blows it out of the water. Like you don't change that. You don't even need it. And sometimes you have to do that, and that's really hard for, I think, young editors who know they know it's better, but they have to change things. So they have to let that go and keep on moving forward and keep on cutting and not think about it. And maybe they could go put it back the way they liked it before. But I don't know about mistakes. They probably shouldn't drink on the job. I don't know.
Wait,
But I don't even agree with that.
you learn? You do have Martini Friday.
We do. It's something we started on Citizen Ruth. We have martinis.
So
on
let's get
Friday.
some secrets out here.
Yeah, man.
And there's another thing you learned, that Alexander had this great idea about cutting on a train.
Yeah.
You said you can cut on a train and you can drink on a train, but you can't do both.
Can't do both. That
now
is-
you've
that is a
learned
lesson.
something very useful.
I'm going to save you guys a lot of time. You can't do both. You can
Thank
try.
you so much.
Thank you, Bobbie.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.